April 1945. The war in Europe had weeks left to live, but no one in that ruined German town knew it yet. Dawn crept over the shattered rooftops, washing broken chimneys and burned-out rafters in a pale, indifferent light. The air smelled of wet ash and boiled cabbage, the permanent scent of a country that had run out of everything except hunger. In the courtyard of an old factory, now an American field kitchen, steam curled from giant steel pots. Mess Sergeant Jack Thompson stood with his hands on his hips, watching his men stir vats of oatmeal and stack trays of black bread. He'd done this on every front from North Africa to the Rhine, feeding scared, tired kids in uniform and pretending it was just another day back home. That was when he saw the movement. A blur in the corner of his eye. Small. Fast. Jack turned. Between the trucks, a thin figure in a ragged gray coat darted forward, hands trembling as they reached for a loaf left too close to the edge of a crate. "Hey!" one of the GIs shouted. Boots scraped. A rifle clattered as it was grabbed up. The boy froze. He couldn't have been more than 13, maybe 14. Bilious yellow light from a bare bulb caught hollow cheeks, cracked lips, eyes too large for his face. The crust of the bread left a trail of crumbs down his sleeve as he clutched it to his chest like something sacred. An MP leveled his carbine. "Drop it, kid. Hand a hoch." The boy hesitated, just a heartbeat, and in that moment Jack saw it. Not defiance, not hatred, just raw, animal terror, and something else, desperation, the kind that didn't belong to one boy, the kind that belonged to a family. "Sergeant," the MP said, teeth clenched, "you want me to take him in?" Jack Thompson looked from the boy's shaking hands to the bread he was supposed to protect for his own men. Then he made a decision no manual had prepared him for. A decision that would break the rules of an army at war. And feed a German family that didn't know his name. To understand what that moment meant, you have to step back from the courtyard and look at the world as it was before that loaf of bread changed hands. By the spring of 1945, Germany was starving. Years of war, blockades, and bombing had stripped the country bare. Fields lay cratered, rail lines were twisted metal, cities that had once boasted bakeries on every corner were now skeletons of stone, haunted by people carrying empty pails and ration cards that meant almost nothing. For ordinary German families, every day became a calculation. What could be traded, what could be burned, what could be eaten. Wallpaper paste, grass, turnip peels, anything. For soldiers like Jack Thompson, it looked different. He came from Kansas wheat country, where the worst thing he'd ever seen before the war was a dust storm rolling over dry fields. In his world, the measure of a man wasn't how well he fought, but how well he kept others fed. The Army saw that in him early. They made him a mess sergeant. It sounded simple. Just cook, they said. But in reality, a mess sergeant was a quiet center of gravity. He'd be the first up and the last to sleep. He'd know which kid hadn't eaten the night before, which one turned green at the smell of powdered eggs, which one needed a second helping because the letter from home had been bad news. He also knew the rules. Food was ammunition. You didn't give it away, not to civilians, certainly not to the people whose army had been trying to kill yours for years. Officially, the policy was clear. American rations were for American soldiers. Unofficially, things got complicated, because as the front moved eastward and American units rolled through shattered German towns, the line between enemy and victim blurred. GIs handed chocolate bars to wide-eyed kids. They traded cigarettes for trinkets. They watched old women pick through garbage piles outside the perimeter, searching for potato skins. Jack had watched it happen in Italy, in France, and now here, on the edge of the Rhine. Every new town looked the same, white flags draped from broken windows, churches with no roofs, and lines of thin people waiting for something, anything, to change. But his job was still his job: feed the men, keep to the schedule, guard the stocks. He did it because he believed in responsibility. He did it because every morning, when he watched his boys come through the chow line, he saw someone's son, someone's husband, someone who needed strength more than pity. But on that cold morning, staring at that German boy clutching stolen bread, Jack Thompson discovered that there was a limit to what the rules could answer. And that was where the real story began. The MP's finger tightened on the trigger. The boy's knuckles whitened around the loaf. He looked like he was about to bolt, but there was nowhere to run. Trucks boxed him in on 3 sides. The only open path led past 2 armed Americans. Jack stepped forward. "Whoa, easy," he said, raising a hand. "Put the rifle down, Collins. He's a kid, not a sniper." Collins didn't lower his weapon. "Sarge, we've had saboteurs hide in everything from nuns' habits to potato sacks. Colonel wants civilians kept away from the food as rules." Jack nodded slowly. It was true. Orders had been clear. No unauthorized persons near the supplies, no exceptions. He looked at the boy. "We heist to?" Jack asked, his German clumsy but serviceable. The boy swallowed. "Lucas," he whispered. "Lucas Bauer." "How old are you, Lucas?" Jack continued. "14," he said. 14. Jack exhaled through his nose. 14. Back home, a 14-year-old worried about school dances and baseball tryouts. Here, they stole bread under the barrels of rifles. "Sergeant," Collins insisted, "we bring him to the colonel. He'll make an example. We've already had guys losing rations to theft. If the locals think they can just walk in and take—" Jack cut him off. "He didn't walk in. He slipped in because he's starving. Look at him." It wasn't just pity talking. Jack had seen hunger enough to recognize its shape. It hollowed out a face a certain way, turned eyes into huge, dark wells. It made hands shake around food like a man gripping a lifeline. Jack had seen that look once before, on his father's face during the worst years of the Depression, when crops failed and good men stared at empty grain silos. He stepped closer to Lucas, careful, like approaching a spooked animal. "Du bist hungrig?" Jack fragte. "Du bist hungrig?" The boy nodded once, still not daring to loosen his hold on the bread. "Hast du Familie?" "Do you have family?" Another nod. "Mutter. 2 Schwestern. Klein. Mother. 2 sisters. Small." Jack felt something twist inside his chest. Behind him, the kitchen clattered on. Pots banged, men joked, ladles dipped into full vats. The contrast felt obscene. Plenty on one side of the trucks, desperation on the other. This is why you're here," a hard voice in his head argued. "Your men march, they fight, they freeze in foxholes. You keep them alive. You don't owe the enemy anything." But another voice, quieter, older, spoke too. "If this were your family in Kansas, if someone else held the ladle." Jack made his decision. "Collins," he said without taking his eyes off the boy, "stand down." "Sarge, I can't just—" "That's an order." Something in Jack's tone stopped the argument. The MP's jaw worked, but he lowered the rifle, still glaring. Jack turned fully to Lucas. "Listen to me," he said slowly, choosing simple words. "You can't steal. If the officers catch you, they will punish you. Verstehen?" The boy hesitated, then nodded. Jack reached out and, gently, pried the loaf from Lucas's grip. For a second the boy resisted, panic flooding his face. Then Jack broke the bread in half. He shoved one half back into Lucas's hands. The boy stared, stunned. "For Dean family," Jack said. "For your family." Lucas's lips parted, but no sound came out. "You show up here tomorrow," Jack continued, jerking his thumb toward the kitchen. "Same time, you work, peel potatoes, clean pans, no stealing work." He pointed at the bread. "Then, you take this every day. Deal?" He didn't know if the boy understood every word, but the meaning was clear enough. Work, food, not a gift, a trade. Lucas clutched the half-loaf to his chest like a treasure and nodded so hard his hair flopped into his eyes. "Go," Jack said quietly. "Schnell, before my CO sees you." The boy ran, shoulders hunched, disappearing through a gap in the fence like smoke. A faint white trail of crumbs marked his path. Collins whistled low. You just set a precedent, Sarge. When the colonel finds out, he's going to set you on fire. Then I'll make sure he doesn't find out, Jack muttered. But the stakes were already forming in his mind. He was bending rules written to keep order in a shattered country. If word spread that the Americans were handing out food, they could have mobs at the gate. His own men might resent seeing supplies leave the compound for Kraut's, yet he couldn't shake the image of that boy's eyes. That night, as he sat under a dim bulb accounting for sacks of flour and tins of Spam, Jack added something else to his mental ledger, a quiet note he couldn't write on any form. If this doesn't work, there's more at risk than my stripes. There's a family out there depending on a stranger in a foreign uniform. And tomorrow morning, he'd find out if Lucas trusted him enough to come back. Lucas came back. He appeared just after dawn the next morning, hovering at the edge of the courtyard in the same threadbare coat, hair combed back as if he were reporting for inspection. In his hands, he clutched nothing this time. No stolen bread, no hidden knife. Only a nervous determination. Jack caught sight of him between two stacks of ration crates. "You're on time," Jack said, trying not to smile. "Good. Come." He led the boy around the trucks and into the heart of the kitchen. The smell hit Lucas first. Strong coffee, frying bacon, the yeasty warmth of fresh bread. His eyes darted from pot to pot, tracking every movement the way a starving man watches a banquet. "Potatoes," Jack said, pointing to a mountain of them spilling from burlap sacks. "You wash, you peel." He grabbed a knife, placed it carefully in Lucas's hand, then mimed the motion. Peel, turn, peel. The boy watched, then copied. His fingers were clumsy at first, but desperation is a fast teacher. Within minutes, peelings were dropping in wet curls onto the floor. One of the younger GIs, Sanders, paused on his way past with a tray of mess tins. "Since when we got local help, Sarge?" "Since I said so," Jack replied without looking up. "He's peeling. You aren't. Any complaints?" Sanders grinned. "No, sir. Long as it means I don't touch another potato until VJ Day." The first challenge came that afternoon. Jack was doling out stew, ladle clinking against metal cups, when Captain Riley showed up with an inspector's eye and a stack of forms. He was a by-the-book officer, the kind who believed regulations existed because someone smarter than him had written them. "Sergeant Thompson," Riley said, scanning the yard, "we need to review civilian interaction protocols. We've had reports of unauthorized Germans near the food stores." Jack's pulse ticked up. He kept his face neutral. "We chase 'em off, sir, same as always." Riley nodded slowly. "See that you do. These people lost a war. They don't get to eat before my men do." "Yes, sir." Behind them, Lucas's head bobbed briefly into view as he carried a bucket toward the trash pile. Jack's heart jumped. He barked over his shoulder without missing a beat. "Sanders, didn't I tell you to clear those pans? Move it, soldier." Sanders, catching on, accelerated his pace, blocking the captain's line of sight. It was a small victory, but a fragile one. Every day brought another test. Some were practical. There were only so many scraps Jack could officially declare waste before it became suspicious. He trained Lucas to scrape every pan clean, to stack bones and crusts separately. What wasn't fit for the GIs became a second menu, quietly set aside. Other tests were moral. One evening, as they were closing down the kitchen, Jack saw Lucas stuffing a second heel of bread under his coat, eyes darting toward the gate. "Hey," Jack said sharply, "we had a deal. One portion. For work." Lucas froze. Slowly, he pulled the extra piece out, shame burning his cheeks. "Beta," he whispered. "Meine Schwester. My sister." Jack felt the old hard voice rise inside him again. "If you let him break the rules, you'll lose control. You're not running a charity. You're running a mess." He took the bread, held it, thought, then he tore it in half. "One extra," he said. "Nur heute. Only today. Tomorrow you ask. No stealing. Verstanden?" Lucas nodded, relief flooding his features. "What's her name?" Jack asked. He hesitated. "Anna." The name lodged in Jack's mind like a splinter. Another day, a different kind of pressure. 3 GIs leaned on a fence post, watching Lucas scrub a kettle half his size. "Look at that, will you?" one of them muttered. "Feedin' Hitler Youth now? My cousin got killed at Bastogne by a Kraut about that age." Jack walked up, hands in his pockets. "You got a problem, Miller?" "Yeah, Sarge, I do," the man said, squaring up. "We're barely getting enough coffee as it is, and now we're playing soup kitchen for the enemy. Those kids cheered when our planes went down." Jack's jaw tightened. "You see any cheering now?" Miller glanced at Lucas, who kept his head down, cheeks flushed, arms red from hot water. "What I see," Jack continued quietly, "is a kid who hasn't had a full meal in months. You think he planned this war? You think he sat in Berlin drawing maps? We're winning, Miller. Part of winning is being better than the bastards who started it." Miller looked away, anger warping into something more complicated. "Just don't want to see my chow end up outside the wire." "It won't," Jack said. "Not unless I say so." That night, after the last pot was scrubbed and the last tray stacked, Lucas waited by the back door. Jack handed him a small bundle, bread, a ladleful of stew thick with barley, a precious spoonful of jam. "For your family," he said. "Danke," Lucas murmured. "Vielen Dank." As the boy slipped into the dark streets, Jack felt the weight of what he was doing settle on his shoulders. He was feeding more than one stomach now. He was feeding his own fragile belief that even in the ruins of a monstrous war, small acts of decency still mattered. But war has a way of noticing kindness, and soon their quiet arrangement wouldn't be quiet anymore. The incident came on a gray, wet morning that seemed ordinary in every other way. Clouds hung low over the town, pressing the smoke from cook fires down into the streets. Rain had fallen during the night, turning the factory yard into a patchwork of puddles and slick mud. Jack stood under the awning, sipping weak coffee from a tin mug, watching his men ladle oatmeal into bowls. Lucas was there too, as he had been for weeks now, moving with the practiced rhythm of routine, peeling, carrying, scrubbing. He had filled out a little. The sharp bones in his cheeks were less pronounced. Sometimes when he forgot to be afraid, a quick, shy smile flickered across his face. Jack caught one of those smiles when he handed over a sack of carrots. "Careful," he said. "You cut off a finger, I'm not sewing it back on." "Ja, Sergeant," Lucas replied, his English improving with each stolen phrase. On the other side of the fence, a line had formed. Civilians, mostly women, a few old men, a scattering of children. They stood as close as the MPs allowed, clutching dented pots and chipped plates, eyes tracking every movement inside the yard. Word had spread despite Jack's best efforts. They had seen Lucas walking home with his bundled food. They had smelled the stew. Hunger moves faster than any rumor. "Keep 'em back," Jack heard Collins telling another MP. "We're not running a soup line here." Jack turned away, heart tight. He couldn't feed them all. He could barely justify the one family he'd taken on. But still, every time a pot scraped empty and got tossed aside, he felt a twinge. Breakfast service ended. GIs drifted away, some to trucks, some to makeshift barracks. The yard quieted, the steam thinned. That's when the truck arrived. It was a supply vehicle from Division HQ, canvas flaps rolling, engine growling as it pulled in. On its side, painted in neat white letters, was a word Jack had learned to view with caution: inspection. Captain Riley climbed down from the passenger seat, coat buttoned up, expression tight. He was flanked by 2 unfamiliar officers and an MP with a clipboard. "Sergeant Thompson," Riley called. Jack set down his mug. "Sir." "Quartermaster wants a surprise audit," Riley said. "Stock counts, waste logs, civilian contact procedures, the works." "Of all days." Jack felt something cold settle into his gut. He glanced involuntarily toward the kitchen door, where Lucas was scrubbing a pan. The boy, sensing the change in the air, looked up, eyes wide. "Get your books," Riley said, "and gather your men. We'll start with a walkthrough." The next 30 minutes were a slow-motion nightmare. Jack led them past the storage room, reciting numbers from memory. Sacks of flour, checked. Crates of Spam, checked. Cans of coffee, light but within tolerance. Waste bins, inspected. prodded, notes scribbled. "So far, so good," one of the officers murmured. "Efficient operation, Captain." Jack's focus narrowed. Every time they turned a corner, he calculated distances, sightlines. "Where's Lucas?" There, near the back, arms submerged in a vat, shoulders hunched as if he could shrink into the metal. Riley's gaze followed Jack's for a fraction of a second. "All personnel present and accounted for, Sergeant?" "Yes, sir," Jack lied smoothly. "This is Sanders, Wilkins, Ortiz." He rattled off names, heart thudding. The officers barely glanced up. This was routine for them. Numbers on paper, boxes ticked, until it wasn't. The interruption came from the gate. A raised voice. 2, 3. The crackle of tension that spreads faster than sound. Jack turned. Beyond the fence, the line of civilians had thickened. Somewhere in the middle, a child had started crying. An old woman shouted something in German Jack didn't catch. Collins moved to push them back. "Zurück! Back up!" But hunger has a way of turning fear into boldness. Someone surged forward. Another followed. Hands grabbed at the fence at the empty kettle stacked nearby. Pots clanged, a chorus of need and panic. "Stay where you are!" Riley snapped, but his voice was swallowed by the rising noise. The MP with the clipboard dropped it, reaching for his sidearm. "Sir, they're breaking." The gate latch gave with a groan. A dozen civilians spilled into the yard, faces wild, eyes fixed on the nearest stack of crates. Time slowed. Lucas, standing near the back door, froze. Jack saw him instinctively move in front of a bucket of bread heels, as if his thin frame could shield them. The MP drew his weapon, hands shaking. Collins raised his rifle again. "Stop!" Riley shouted. "Everyone stop!" They didn't. A woman lunged for a crate. The MP swung the butt of his rifle to block her, slipping in the mud. His finger jerked. The shot cracked through the courtyard like a whip. Silence followed, sharp and absolute. For a split second, no one moved. Then a small form collapsed near the gate, a boy of maybe 10 clutching his arm, scream building in his throat. Lucas gasped. Jack moved without thinking. "Weapons down!" he roared, voice hoarse. "Nobody fires another damn shot!" He shoved past Riley, past the stunned officers, dropping to his knees beside the wounded child. Blood oozed through the boy's fingers, bright and shocking against the gray mud. Jack pressed a rag to the wound, muttering reassurances he wasn't sure the boy could understand. Behind him, he heard the civilians begin to wail. "This is exactly what we warned you about," one of the officers hissed to Riley. "You let them too close, and it becomes a riot." Riley's jaw clenched. "Clear them out," he snapped to the MPs. "Use force if you have to." Jack's head snapped up. "Sir, with respect, if we turn this into a bloodbath, we'll have bodies piled against this gate by noon. Let me handle it." "Handle it?" the other officer scoffed. "You've already lost control, Sergeant." The word stung. Lost control. Maybe they were right. Maybe this was the inevitable end of letting the line between soldier and civilian blur. Then Jack saw Lucas. The boy stood a few yards away, paralyzed between two worlds, the civilians who were his people, the Americans who had become his strange, fragile lifeline. In his arms, he held a bulging bundle wrapped in cloth. Bread. The scraps Jack had set aside, and the MP with the clipboard had seen him. "There!" the man shouted. "He's stealing supplies! That kid's been inside the wire this whole time!" In an instant, every eye turned to Lucas. He froze like he'd been spotlighted. Fear blistered across his face. The bundle slipped from his hands, bread spilling into the mud like spilled coins. An MP stepped toward him, hand out. "You!" he barked. "On your knees, hands behind your head!" Lucas didn't move. His gaze darted to Jack, a silent, desperate question. "What do I do?" Jack understood exactly what would happen if he stayed silent. They would treat Lucas as a looter, an enemy. At best, he'd be thrown into a makeshift stockade. At worst, Jack didn't let his mind finish the thought. "Sergeant," Riley said, voice icy, "is there something you want to tell us?" The moment stretched. Rain dripped from the awning in steady beats. The wounded boy whimpered at Jack's feet. Civilians clutched one another, eyes flicking from rifles to bread to the foreign uniforms. Jack stood up slowly. "Yes, sir," he said. He felt every eye in the yard lock onto him. "That boy," Jack continued, voice steady, "is not stealing from us. He's working for us, on my orders." Riley's eyes narrowed. "Explain." Jack took a breath that felt like stepping off a cliff. "He's been peeling potatoes, cleaning pots, scraping pans. In return, I've been giving him scraps, what we'd throw away anyway, enough for his family not to starve. That's it." "You've been feeding civilians from Army stores without authorization?" one of the officers exploded. "You realize that's a direct violation of a rule written by someone who's never watched a child fight a dog for a bone," Jack snapped before he could stop himself. The courtyard went very still. Riley stared at him. Collins looked like he wanted to melt into the mud. Miller, the GI who'd complained before, watched with a strange, intent expression. The officer recovered first. "Sergeant Thompson, you are one step away from court-martial." "Maybe," Jack said. "But if you're looking for someone to blame for this mess, blame me, not him." He pointed to Lucas. "I put him in this yard," he said. "I told him to carry that bundle. If you need to make an example of someone, I'm right here." For a long moment, no one spoke. Then, unexpectedly, Miller stepped forward. "Sir," he said, addressing Riley, "the Sarge is telling the truth. That kid's been busting his back in this kitchen for weeks. Never took a thing we didn't give him, and we got less waste now, more efficient." Another GI nodded. "Yeah, he works harder than half of us. Don't punish him for trying to keep his sisters alive." "Sisters?" Riley asked, eyes flicking to Lucas. "Two of them," Jack said quietly, "and a mother whose face you don't want to see when you explain why her son isn't coming home tonight." The wind picked up, carrying the smell of wet wool and fear. Riley looked from Jack to the line of civilians, to the wounded boy clutching his arm, to Lucas trembling in the mud. The strictest officer in the yard found himself staring at a truth that didn't fit neatly into any regulation. War was supposed to be simple, us and them, right and wrong. But here, in the rain, it was just humans and hunger. Finally, Riley exhaled. "Corpsman!" he shouted. "Get that wounded boy patched up. No more shots unless I say so." He turned back to Jack. "As for this arrangement," he said slowly, "it will be regularized. From now on, you'll submit a list of local helpers, names, ages, work duties. They will be compensated with whatever scraps you can legitimately declare as surplus. If I find you cooking an extra tin of beans just to hand it outside the wire, we'll have a different conversation. Understood?" Jack blinked. It wasn't approval, but it wasn't the execution he'd expected either. "Yes, sir," he said. "And that boy?" Riley nodded toward Lucas. Jack's throat tightened. "He stays, on my responsibility." Riley hesitated, then nodded once. "Then he gets a work badge. He's now an official kitchen helper. Any MP who points a rifle at him again without cause will answer to me." A pulse of relief rippled through the yard, invisible but real. Lucas sagged with it. His legs gave out and he dropped to his knees, not in submission, but in sheer exhaustion. Jack crossed to him, crouched down, and picked up the scattered pieces of bread. "Come on, kid," he said quietly. "Let's get you a badge before somebody changes their mind." As they walked toward the office, the civilians at the gate watched, some with suspicion, some with hate, but some with something like hope. That day, in a muddy courtyard in a ruined German town, an American mess sergeant had risked his career for a boy who should have been his enemy. And in doing so, he had nudged the war just a little away from revenge and toward something else. The badge was a simple thing. A rectangle of cardboard, laminated with tape, stamped with the division insignia and the word helper in block letters. To most people, it would have looked like nothing, a bureaucratic artifact destined to be lost in a drawer. To Lucas, it was a shield, The first time Jack clipped it to the boy's coat, Lucas touched it with reverence, fingers tracing the letters he couldn't yet fully read. Then he looked up at Jack, something fragile and fierce burning in his eyes. "I am American soldier now?" he asked, voice tentative. Jack laughed softly. "Not quite, kid, but it means you belong here. Nobody can shove you out of this yard as long as you're wearing it." It meant more than that. It meant that when other German children pressed up against the fence, shouting his name, Lucas could stand a little straighter. It meant that when an MP frowned, he could hold up his badge like a passport between worlds. Inside the kitchen, things shifted too. At first, some GIs grumbled. The idea of official German helpers felt like a betrayal to those who'd lost friends in the Ardennes or Anzio. But realities on the ground have a way of changing minds. When the garbage bins stopped overflowing, when the kettles were scrubbed to a shine, when the line moved faster because Lucas anticipated needs before they were shouted, something subtle happened. The men started talking to him. "Hey, kid," Sanders would say, tossing him a towel. "You learn any more English curse words today?" Lucas would smirk. "Maybe." "What's maybe in German again?" "Vielleicht." "Wellicht?" They'd butcher the pronunciation. He'd correct them, laughing. In between, Jack watched something almost impossible take shape. Familiarity. It was small at first. A cigarette slipped into Lucas's hand by a GI who'd forgotten he wasn't old enough to smoke. A joke told slowly, with exaggerated gestures, until the boy laughed a moment when a soldier, staring too long at a crumpled photograph from home, handed it to Lucas without speaking, and the boy nodded as if he understood everything the man couldn't say. Beyond the fence, other families noticed the change. One afternoon, as Jack was closing up, a woman approached the gate. She was thin, wrapped in a faded coat, but her posture was stubbornly straight. She held a small bundle in her hands. "Sergeant Thompson?" she called in careful English. Jack walked over, wary. "That's me." She pushed the bundle through the fence, an embroidered cloth, old but clean. "For you," she said, "from the Bauer family. My son." Her voice trembled on the word. "He says you saved his life." Jack looked down at the cloth. It was the kind of thing someone would have kept in a drawer for special occasions. Giving it away meant giving away a piece of history. "I didn't save his life," Jack said gently. "He works hard. He earns his food." The woman's eyes shone. "In these days," she replied. "That's the same thing." Word of the arrangement spread upward as well as outward. Other units heard that Captain Riley's command had started registering local helpers, kitchen assistants, laundry workers, translators. It wasn't a formal policy at first, just a practical adjustment. But practicality often becomes doctrine. The Army soon realized something obvious. Hungry civilians were desperate civilians. Desperate civilians were unpredictable. But civilians with a little food, a little money, and a little dignity, they were less likely to sabotage, more likely to cooperate. So the helper badges multiplied, not just in that town, but in others, in France, in Italy, in the shattered remains of the Reich. Local men and women, and yes, children, found themselves working in Allied mess halls, motor pools, aid stations. They peeled potatoes, patched uniforms, swept floors. In return, they got food. A small wage, protection from the chaos outside the wire. Was this purely humanitarian? Number war rarely offers such clean motives. The Army gained labor in places where shipping and extra personnel was costly. It gained intelligence from people who knew the back roads and alleyways. It gained a way to stabilize areas without committing more combat troops. But inside that messy, calculated exchange, something else grew. Human contact. Lucas learned that Kansas had fields so flat you could watch your dog run away for 3 days. Sanders learned that before the war, Lucas had wanted to be a carpenter like his grandfather Collins. The MP who'd once almost shot him discovered that the German word for rifle carried a weight that made him uncomfortable now. And Jack? Jack learned that the line between enemy and neighbor could be crossed with something as simple as a shared bowl of soup. Years slid by after the war ended. The Americans packed up, the flags came down, the factory yard became a factory again. The mud dried, then was paved over. New windows replaced shattered ones. Children who had once watched the kitchen steam from behind barbed wire now watched it from schoolyard gates. Lucas grew. He finished school in fits and starts, catching up after years lost to war. He apprenticed with a builder, hands finding strength in wood instead of kettles. He kept the faded helper badge in a drawer beside his bed. Sometimes, late at night, he'd take it out and run his fingers over the letters, remembering the smell of army coffee and the sound of Jack's gravelly voice barking orders over clattering pans. He heard rumors, years later, that Sergeant Jack Thompson had gone home, married the girl whose letter he kept folded in his pocket, and opened a diner on a highway in Kansas. The thought made Lucas smile. In that faraway place, he imagined Jack ladling stew into bowls for truckers and farmers, complaining about paperwork, laughing at complaints about overcooked bacon. He wondered if Jack ever told his customers about the winter in Germany, when he'd fed someone else's son. And if those men, sipping their coffee in that diner, understood that the person filling their plates had once risked everything to feed a boy on the wrong side of the war. For Lucas, one truth remained. He had survived not because of strategy or generals or treaties. He had survived because in a moment of crisis, one man had looked at him and seen not an enemy, but a hungry child with a family waiting in the dark. And that, more than any official policy, was what began to change the way former enemies looked at one another, long after the guns fell silent. History remembers the big things, the dates carved into stone, the battles with names that echo across classrooms, the treaties signed in grand halls by men in clean uniforms. It rarely remembers the small courtyard in a ruined town where a mess sergeant broke a loaf of bread in half. But lives do. For Lucas, the war was not just tanks and planes and flags changing over city halls. It was the weight of a half-loaf in his hands. It was the sound of an American voice saying, "Work for it, and you take it home." For Jack, victory was not only measured in captured bridges or surrendered divisions. It was measured in the knowledge that somewhere, in a house he would never see, 2 little girls went to bed with full stomachs because he had bent a rule. War is made of systems and orders and strategies, but it is also made of moments, when one person chooses to see another as human first. German boy, American sergeant, enemy and occupier, hungry and fed. In the end, their story is not really about rations or regulations. It's about the simple, stubborn act of kindness in a world built to crush it. And how sometimes the quietest decisions on the smallest mornings are the ones that echo the longest after the guns go silent.